All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're going deep into a world that both fascinates and terrifies serial killers.
Yeah, you all asked for this one.
And we're coming at it armed with some pretty heavy-duty intel, straight from the FBI, no less.
Yeah, we're talking the FBI Serial Murder Symposium back in 2005, plus some background from Wikipedia.
You know, it's funny, isn't it? Serial killers, they always seem to grip the public imagination.
Oh, for sure. But we're here to cut through the hype, the Hollywood sensationalism.
Right. Let's stick to the facts, the real insights from those who are actually on the front lines of these investigations.
Absolutely.
So one of the first things the FBI tackles head-on is all those myths surrounding serial killers, the stuff you see in movies.
Right, all those stereotypes.
Like, for instance, the idea that they're all dysfunctional loners, can't hold down a job, live in some creepy basement apartment.
Yeah, totally isolated from society.
But here's where things get interesting. The FBI says that's often not the case at all.
Nope, not even close.
They use the example of Robert Yates.
The Spokane serial killer.
Murdered 17 women.
But get this, he was married. 5 kids. Living in a seemingly normal neighborhood.
What?
He was even a decorated pilot in the National Guard.
So, family man, pilot, serial killer.
Hiding in plain sight.
It's like if investigators are only look after that stereotypical loner, they could completely miss someone like Yates.
Exactly.
Okay, so myth busted.
Busted. And another big one they go after is that all serial killers are white males.
Oh, yeah, you hear that one all the time.
But the FBI's research actually shows that their demographics tend to mirror the overall population.
Interesting.
Meaning, you've got serial killers of all races, backgrounds.
Oh, so it's just a reflection of society at large?
Pretty much. They even point to Rory Conde, a Colombian native.
Okay, so no racial profiling here. What other myths do they debunk?
Well, there's the whole thing about their motivation, right?
Oh, you mean that they're all just driven by, like, twisted sexual desires?
Right, like that's the only thing driving them. But the FBI found a whole spectrum of motives.
Really?
Anger, revenge, financial gain. Some are even driven by ideology. You remember the D.C. sniper case? John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo?
Oh, yeah, that was a terrifying case.
Their motives were way more about anger and power.
Than anything sexual, right?
Exactly. They even tried to extort money.
So the sex-crazed maniac stereotype, that out the window too, then. It makes you wonder how investigators even begin to untangle all those motives, though.
It's a puzzle, for sure.
But before we even get into the why, maybe we should start with how the FBI actually defines serial murder in the first place.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Because I bet a lot of people have, the wrong idea.
They do. Most folks think you need, like, 3 or more victims.
Right. That's what I always thought.
But the FBI's official definition, only 2.
Wait, seriously, only 2?
Yep. And the reason, it's actually pretty strategic.
Oh.
They set the bar lower so law enforcement can jump on potential cases sooner.
Ah, get a head start. Makes sense.
Prevent more murders, hopefully.
But they're not just talking about any 2 murders, right?
No, of course not.
There's got to be something that separates it from, like, a domestic dispute or a crime of passion.
Right. The key phrase is separate events.
Separate events. So meaning?
Meaning the murders happen in distinct incidents, separated by time.
Gotcha. So it's about a pattern of behavior.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the definition, but what about that big question, the one everyone wants answered? What turns someone into a serial killer?
Yeah, is there some kind of, like, recipe, some common thread that runs through all these cases?
Right.
The FBI is pretty clear on this. No easy answers.
I figured as much.
No single cause. No magic formula. They compare human development to, like, this constantly evolving nervous system.
Whoa, okay, that's a pretty powerful analogy.
Right, it's shaped by, like, a million different factors throughout life.
So our experiences are constantly rewiring our brains, in a way.
Exactly.
So then what about all the usual suspects, right? Childhood abuse, substance abuse, head injuries.
They talk about those.
Do those play a role?
They could, but the FBI really stresses this. The final decision to kill, it's a personal one.
It's a choice.
A choice, no matter what's happened to them in the past.
Okay, so no predetermined fate.
Nope.
There's still free will involved. Wow, that's actually kind of reassuring in a weird way.
In a way, yeah. But it also makes it even harder to figure these facts out, right?
Right. If there's no single profile, no serial killer starter kit, how do investigators even begin to approach these cases?
Well, the FBI report spends a lot of time looking at the traits of psychopathy, because those traits often show up in serial killers.
Oh, interesting. So not all psychopaths become serial killers.
Definitely not.
But there's some kind of connection.
There seems to be.
Okay, hold on. I gotta admit, I'm a little fuzzy on what exactly psychopathy is. Can you break that down for me?
Sure. Think of it as a personality disorder, but with a very specific set of traits. The FBI actually breaks it down into 4 main factors: interpersonal, affective, lifestyle, and antisocial.
Okay, let's unpack those one by one. What's interpersonal all about?
Well, think about someone who's incredibly charming.
Okay, so they're likable.
Superficially, yeah.
Hmm.
But also very manipulative, grandiose sense of self-worth, pathological liar.
Oh, so they can easily charm their way into anyone's life.
Exactly.
Gain your trust. And then, okay, that's pretty creepy when you think about it.
It is. And then you have the affective factor, which is all about emotions.
Okay, so how they feel things.
Exactly. But psychopaths, they tend to lack certain emotions, like remorse, guilt.
No conscience, basically.
Kinda, yeah. Their emotions are shallow, they lack empathy, and they never accept responsibility for their actions.
So even if they do something awful, they just don't feel bad about it.
Right.
That's disturbing. Okay, what about lifestyle?
That one's all about behavior. Constant need for stimulation, impulsivity, irresponsibility. Often they live parasitically off of others.
Sounds chaotic.
It often is.
And antisocial, that one seems pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, I think poor behavioral controls, early behavioral problems, maybe a history of juvenile delinquency, criminal activity.
So trouble starts early?
Often, yeah. But it's important to remember, just because someone shows these traits doesn't automatically make them a serial killer.
Right, right. It's not a guarantee.
Exactly. Psychopathy might explain how they operate, their methods, their coldness, but not necessarily why they kill.
So it's more about the how than the why.
Right.
Okay, I'm starting to see why the FBI is so careful about saying there's no one-size-fits-all explanation for these guys.
It's complex.
And I guess that's why they've moved away from trying to categorize serial killers into those neat little personality types.
Yeah, those are way too rigid, too simplistic.
Because in reality, their motives could be all over the map.
Exactly. Motives can be mixed. They can change over time.
So instead of asking what type of killer is this, investigators are focusing more on,
What is driving this person to kill?
okay, that makes a lot more sense. It's a more nuanced approach.
It is.
So what kind of motives are we talking about?
Well, the FBI came up with a bunch of broad categories.
Lay 'em on me.
First, there's anger.
Straightforward enough.
Yeah, the offender is driven by rage, maybe hostility towards a certain group, or society in general.
So kind of like a hate crime, but on a much larger, more terrifying scale.
Yeah, you could say that. Then there's criminal enterprise.
What's that all about?
This is where the murders are tied to organized crime, gangs, drug trafficking,
So it's about eliminating rivals, protecting their turf.
maintaining power.
Murder as a business strategy, basically. Brutal. What else?
There's financial gain.
Oh, so just plain old greed.
Exactly. Classic examples are like the Black Widow scenario.
Killing for insurance money.
Inheritance, yeah.
Cold-blooded. Okay, what else?
Then you've got ideology.
So these are the ones who...
They're driven by some twisted belief system, a cause.
Right, right. Could be anything from terrorism to, like, some extreme political agenda.
All fueled by a warped sense of purpose, yeah.
Yikes, that's scary to think about.
It is. And then there's the power thrill category.
Okay, these are the ones who get off on.
The control, the thrill of the hunt, the act of killing itself. The DC sniper case, that's a good example of this type.
So it's like they're playing a deadly game.
Exactly.
Chilling. Okay, anything else?
Well, there's psychosis,
Oh, so these are the ones who are...
suffering from a serious mental illness, hallucinations, delusions, a completely distorted reality.
So the murders are driven by their internal struggles, not some external factor.
Often, yeah,
It's like they're victims of their own minds, in a way. Tragic.
it can be. And then, of course, there's the sexually based category.
So the classic motive.
But remember, it's not just about sex itself.
Right, it's more about
The gratification they get from the act of killing. The power dynamic.
Gotcha. So not all serial killers are neatly tucked into one of these boxes.
Right, a lot of them could be driven by a combo of these motives.
So it's really more of a spectrum than a checklist?
Exactly. And it's definitely a lot more complicated than what you see in the movies.
No kidding. But now I'm really curious about how investigators actually tackle these cases in the real world.
Ah, yeah, the nitty-gritty of it all.
Because it sounds like it's way more than just, you know, dusting for fingerprints and chasing down clues.
Oh, yeah, it's a whole other level. And that's actually where we'll pick up in part 2 of this deep dive.
Ooh, can't wait. All right, so we've dug into those motivations behind serial murder, those different categories the FBI laid out. But now I'm kind of curious about the actual nuts and bolts of these investigations.
Yeah, the hands-on part.
Like, where do investigators even start? I mean, you're working in a homicide, right? Walk into a crime scene. It's got to be tough to know if this is just an isolated incident or the beginning of something much bigger.
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest hurdles is recognizing you might have a serial case on your hands early on.
Yeah, I can see that, especially if victims seem totally random or the crimes happen in different places.
Right, those connections might not be obvious at first.
So how do they even, like, start to connect those dots?
Well, this is where the FBI really hammers home the importance of communication, like real collaboration between all those different law enforcement agencies.
Because you could have different police departments, different states even, working on what they think are isolated cases.
Exactly. And if they're not sharing information, comparing notes, a serial killer could slip right through the cracks.
It's like you're trying to solve a giant puzzle, but all the pieces are scattered everywhere.
A very gruesome puzzle. So one of the ways they tackle this is through databases, like VICAP.
VICAP, that rings a bell.
It stands for Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. Basically, it's this centralized system.
Okay, so investigators can.
Input all sorts of details about violent crimes, serial murders too.
And then,
And then the system can actually flag potential connections. So like, if one department's got a case that's similar to a case in another state, VICAP can pick up on those similarities.
wow, that's kind of amazing. It's like a massive crime-solving network.
Exactly. And then there's their LEO website too, Law Enforcement Online.
Okay, what's that one all about?
It's like the secure platform where agencies can share info, work together on investigations, even get access to resources, training materials.
So it sounded like tech is playing a bigger and bigger role in these investigations.
Oh, for sure. But the FBI still emphasizes that good old-fashioned detective work is crucial.
Yeah, like what?
Meticulously processing those crime scenes, really analyzing the evidence, building that rock-solid case.
Okay, I can see that. But I'm also picturing this. You've got all this information flooding in, evidence piling up, and there's got to be this enormous pressure to catch the killer. It must be crazy chaotic.
It can be. And that's where leadership comes in. The FBI spends a lot of time talking about how to manage these task forces.
Because it's more than just throwing a ton of people at the problem, right?
Way more. They really stress this quality over quantity.
So you need investigators who are experienced, not just a bunch of rookies.
Exactly. And you need strong leadership to keep everything from going off the rails.
Because I imagine there's a lot of, like, internal pressure, too. Egos clashing, people wanting to take charge.
Oh yeah, all that plus the media scrutiny, the public wanting answers. The families of the victims, too.
I can't even imagine that pressure.
It's intense. So the FBI actually has a bunch of advice for managing that.
Like what?
Well, they recommend this pre-planned but adaptable models for dealing with all that info these cases generate.
So have a plan, but be ready to change it on the fly.
Exactly. And then communication is key.
Of course, yeah.
Clear lines of authority, a designated spokesperson, daily briefings to keep everyone in the loop.
It's almost like a well-oiled machine when it's working, right?
That's the goal for sure. But one thing that really stood out to me in the FBI report is how much they focus on the investigators themselves.
Oh, yeah. How so?
They acknowledge how draining these cases can be,
Because you're dealing with the worst of humanity day after day.
Exactly. And they stress the need to address that stress, prevent burnout,
So things like officer assistance programs, counseling.
all of that, yeah. It's important stuff. But let's switch gears a bit now and talk about the forensic side of things.
Okay, the science. I was wondering when we'd get to that.
Right. So the FBI really dives into the whole forensic focus.
Which is?
Basically, they emphasize how important it is to be consistent
Consistent in.
in how you process the crime scenes, collect the evidence, that sort of thing.
So everyone's on the same page, following the same procedures.
Exactly. And they use this case, Richard Evanitz.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
He was this serial killer who operated in Virginia, abducted and murdered young girls.
Oh, awful.
Yeah. And investigators ended up using all sorts of forensic techniques to build their case against him.
Like what?
Well, fiber analysis, for one.
Fiber analysis. Okay, so they were looking at,
Tiny little fibers, yeah, found on the victims.
and they were able to.
Link those fibers back to fibers found in his car, his home.
Wow, so something that small can make or break a case. That's incredible.
It is, and they used other stuff too, like hair comparison, fingerprint analysis. It's all about putting those pieces together,
Like a giant puzzle.
Exactly. But in the end, it's not just about catching a killer, right? It's about building a case that will stick.
Oh, right, so it's got to hold up in court,
And that's where prosecution comes in.
which can be tricky, I imagine.
The FBI actually recommends getting prosecutors involved early on,
Really? Why?
so they can make sure all the evidence is admissible in court. You don't want to do all that work just to have it thrown out on a technicality.
No, definitely not. But what about cases that span multiple states?
Multi-jurisdictional cases, oh, those are a nightmare. They highlight the D.C. sniper case again.
Yeah.
Trying to coordinate between all those different states, agencies, it was a huge challenge.
So how did they end up handling the prosecution?
Well, the choice of where to try the case, that was a strategic decision, ended up getting convictions in multiple jurisdictions.
Okay, so a lot of legal maneuvering going on behind the scenes.
Tons. And it's just another layer of complexity these cases have. But there's one more big piece of the puzzle we haven't touched on yet, the media.
Oh, right, because these cases always blow up in the media, which I guess can be helpful in a way.
It can be, but it can also be a huge headache for investigators.
Yeah, I bet it.
The FBI actually has a whole section in their research about navigating those media relations. And they're really big on being proactive.
Proactive, meaning.
Like, have a plan for how you're going to handle the media. Don't let them control the narrative.
So what do they suggest? Like a total media blackout?
No, not necessarily. They actually stress the importance of having a designated public information officer, a PIO.
Oh, so that's the person who.
Deals with the press, which is info responsibly, kind of like the face of the investigation.
Because you need someone who knows how to walk that line, right?
Exactly. Transparency is important, got to keep the public informed, but you also don't want to jeopardize the case.
Right. You don't want to tip off the killer or accidentally reveal something that could hurt the investigation.
Exactly. And the FBI even talks about using press releases strategically.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about sharing information.
It's about shaping public perception, maybe even drumming up some leads.
So you got to be smart about it.
For sure. And you also got to address any bad info that's out there. All those rumors, the speculation.
Yeah, that stuff can spread like wildfire.
It can. And the FBI is really wary of those talking heads who love to chime in on these cases.
Oh, you mean the, like, armchair detectives who claim to be experts?
Exactly. The ones with no real inside knowledge. And the FBI is pretty clear. Those folks can actually do more harm than good.
Huh, how so?
Well, they could misinform the public, maybe even influence the killer's behavior.
Oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that.
And they could even taint potential juries later on.
So they're not just annoying, they could actually mess with the investigation.
Yep. But get this, the FBI also talks about how to actually use the media to catch a killer.
Oh, really? Like how?
They use the BTK case as an example.
Oh, BTK bind, torture, kill. That case was messed up.
It was. And remember, he was obsessed with attention. Loved taunting the police, the media.
Yeah, it went on for years. So what did they do?
Well, the Wichita police, working with the FBI, they basically created this whole media strategy to play to his ego, basically. Encourage him to keep communicating.
So they were kind of playing this cat and mouse game with him, but through the media?
Exactly. And it worked. BTK responded to some of their press releases, and those responses actually led to clues that helped them catch him.
Wow, that's kind of brilliant. It's like the media can be this double-edged sword.
It really can. Use it right. And it can be a powerful tool.
But you also got to be careful. You don't want to exploit the victims or their families.
Right. That's a huge ethical consideration.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The communication challenges, the forensics, the prosecution, the media frenzy. It's like every aspect of these investigations is just intense.
It is. But I think one of the most fascinating things is that even with all this research, all these insights from experts, we're still left with this one big question.
What's that?
Why are we, the public, so obsessed with serial killers? What is it about these horrific stories that draws us in?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. And I think that's where we'll pick up in part 3. All right, so we've unpacked a lot about how those investigations work, the challenges, the strategies. But now I kind of want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier.
Oh, you mean the public's fascination with serial killers?
Yeah, that's the one. Like, why are we so drawn to these stories? What is it about this dark side of humanity that just seems to grab us?
It's a good question, and it's one the FBI talks about, too. They acknowledge this, like, morbid curiosity we have, and they point out how the media often feeds into it.
Oh, for sure. It's like you can't escape it, right? Books, movies, documentaries, heck, even podcasts like ours.
Right. We're all kind of guilty of it, but the FBI also cautions, like, this fascination, it can be a slippery slope.
Oh. How so?
Well, it could end up glorifying these criminals, these horrific acts, maybe even desensitizing us to violence.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like the more we consume these stories, the less shocking they become.
Exactly. And in some cases, it might even inspire copycats.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty disturbing thought.
It is. And it makes you think about, our ethical responsibility when we're dealing with these stories.
Right, like how do we engage with this subject matter without, contributing to the problem?
Exactly. And the FBI, they're very clear about this one thing. The victims, their families, they should always be our primary focus.
Because it's easy to get caught up in the killer's psychology, the whole cat and mouse game with investigators.
Right. It's almost like they become these anti-heroes. But we got to remember, real people were hurt. Real lives were lost.
It's not just some abstract puzzle. It's about those human consequences.
Exactly. And the FBI goes even further. They say it's important to remember those victims even after the case is closed.
Like keep their memories alive.
Yeah. Learn from those tragedies so we can work towards preventing them in the future. Each victim had a story, hopes, dreams. Those stories shouldn't be forgotten.
So it's not just about solving the crime, but also honoring those lives.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the role of the media, the importance of remembering the victims. But where do we go from here? Like, what can we as a society actually do to combat this problem?
Well, the FBI is pretty big on collaboration, like working with Researchers, academics, anyone who's studying these psychological and sociological factors.
So it's about understanding the bigger picture, not just focusing on individual cases.
Right. The more we learn about those causes, the motivations, the patterns, the better equipped we'll be to actually prevent these tragedies.
It makes sense. It's like if we can understand the why, maybe we can stop the how.
Exactly. And they also point out this field, it's always evolving. New research, new forensic techniques, all the time.
So investigators got to stay up to date.
Oh yeah, and be open to new ideas, new ways of thinking. Collaboration is key.
It's like they're saying we're all in this together, right? Like no single person or agency has all the answers.
Right. It takes all of us, sharing knowledge, constantly learning.
Wow, this whole deep dive has been like really eye-opening. It's clear that this whole world of serial murder investigations, it's a lot more complex than what we see in the movies.
Oh, absolutely. It's disturbing, for sure, but I think it's important to understand it.
The reality of these crimes, the impact on those victims and families, and all the work that's being done to stop it from happening again.
Well said.
So, listener, as we wrap this up, remember to stay informed, but also be mindful of how you engage with these stories.
Don't let the sensationalism distract from the real human cost.
And if you're interested in learning more, check out those resources we mentioned. Do your own research.
Keep the conversation going.
All right, well, that's going to do it for our deep dive into the world of serial murder.
Until next time, folks, stay curious.